And in this, whoever it is of the nations invades the country and they make a deal with Israel that is supposed to last for 7 years. That's a 7-year covenant that the nations make with Israel. Everything goes along stiffly, I think, for that first 3.5 years. I believe that there are resignations in Israel. The prophecy in Daniel 9 tells us that the prince will step down. You say, well, what is that? Well, if you look at the chart here that we've made, when they have built the temple, and Jerusalem is a city that has been completed in 49 years, there's a dedication where they dedicate the temple to God, because they've built one in instruction, on God's instructions, and this is what we see at that particular time. Now, the temple is built at that particular time, and I believe David takes the throne, and I call it his coronation. I believe that he's on the earth long before that. But I believe that there's going to be a special time, because there is going to be a Jerusalem and a new temple. And you know, he said even in the 23rd Psalm, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I believe he was talking about the temple. And you can go back in scriptures and you'll find out that God promised him this. Something he asked of God, and he was going to be the prince in Israel. And the scriptures record that David is going to be their king. So all of that time, David has been the king in Israel. And when the time of testing comes along, I believe that there are even Jewish minds and Jewish politicians that get involved in this and force David to step down. And the scriptures in Daniel 9 says, and he shall have nothing. In other words, you're out of the political picture as far as we're concerned. And that's speaking to David. Now, all right, this covenant is made, and it's not made with God's approval. It's made by the Jews with the nations. So for 3.5 years, it's fairly quiet in relationship to Israel and the nations. But the eye of the nations is to capture Jerusalem and control the temple, because that's where God meets with men upon this earth. And for the full 434 years that has been going on, so that men of the nations as well as Israel are reporting into Jerusalem and understanding and gaining an understanding of what their nation should be doing in order to keep in line with God. The Holy Spirit's there, they don't have a lot of problems. Take God's Spirit away and they have lots of problems, and that's what's causing all of this great testing and great tribulation that we hear so much about and know so little about. But this is where it all takes place. Now, when they made this covenant, and it's going on for 3.5 years, suddenly, and the Bible has described it, there's going to be a revolution of the nations against Israel, and they're going to break that covenant, and then they're going to defile the temple. And this is where the man of sin enters upon the temple itself and defiles it, and actually destroys the possibility of them having the morning and evening sacrifices, and so they are stopped right at that point. It's a terrific climax time for Israel. And in its great time of the 490 years of the 70 weeks. Now, then what happens? Well, that red wedge that we have in there is to depict the very, very deep tribulation that is imposed upon Israel. Literally, the armies of the nations have encircled Jerusalem. You read this in some of the Old Testament prophets in Zechariah, the 14th chapter, you have a picture of what's going on. And yet God says, going in that chapter, he says there's going to be a big war. And it used to be, and it still is today, that the victor gets the spoils. And at this point, these nations have been gathering goods and gathering jewels, gathering gold, and that's been their reward of all the attacks that they have made, and now they're going to take Jerusalem, and they will be in the king's seat, they think. So God says to Israel when it starts, he says, now there's going to be a war, but the spoils are going to be divided in the city of Jerusalem amongst the Israelites themselves, the nation of Israel. Now how can that be when they are on the opponent's list and to be hit hard? And this is because God is going to claim the victory. And this is what takes place in what we call, what the scripture calls, the day of the Lord, when God fully examines the situation and decides, now's the time for me to step down and finish this. And this is what ends this terrible time of the tribulation. And that is almost the end of the 70 weeks. Now I would like to have you look with me at right there in the center. There's a box with an A, a square box with an A in it. And I think that that's a point that I want to bring today. You might say, well, David, you're raising a flag and seeing that everybody's going to salute. Well, I don't know that I'm the first one that I discovered this, but if you read the scriptures very carefully, you will find out, as Daniel 8:14 tells us, that there's going to be a period of 2,300 days that follow the desecration of the temple before the temple is cleansed and ready, and I make it an important statement, and ready for the parousia of Jesus Christ. There has to be a lot of preparation for the second coming of Jesus Christ. This is the King of Kings that's coming back to this earth. This is the King of Kings that's going to sit in the throne in the city of Jerusalem. There's going to be a great time of feasting and rejoicing when they see the sign of the Son of Man coming in the heavens. And I think it's over a period of time that they will see this sign until he actually makes his descent to this earth. And he's going to enter the city of Jerusalem, and he's going to enter it as the King of Kings, the King of Jerusalem, and he's the King of Israel, but he's also the King of all the nations. Now that's how it all is going to end when Jesus Christ returns. But back to this 2,300 days. Now there are 3.5 years of that 3.5 of the 2,800 of that period of time that are taken up by the last 3.5 years of that covenant. Then the 2,300 days have that much less to go, and what it leaves is by simple subtraction, that little wedge is worth 2.8 years after the 7 years are over. 2.8 years. What's going on? I believe it's preparation for the parousia. It says they're going to cleanse the temple. And you can go to other places in the Old Testament and find out how they cleansed the temple. It's not just a morning event where they come in and polish a few things. This is going to be taking a defiled temple and making it presentable to Jesus Christ, who is going to be the king and the high priest in the nation of Israel because of his great sacrifice and his authority that he has been given by God to be the one who rules the world at that time. Now, if that leaves you with questions, I hope you look them up and check it out and see whether this surmise that I present to you this morning is the truth.